Hello there. Today, I'd like to take you on an ASMR adventure into the enchanted world of Mary Poppins. In this softly spoken audio talk, we'll explore the history and development of this magical character, from her early beginnings in the very first Mary Poppins book, right through to her latest appearance in the recently launched Disney film, Mary Poppins Returns. We'll take a look at how she has evolved and transformed through her various incarnations, and we'll discover the reason why, even today, this 85-year-old character from a children's book remains so popular with both young and old alike. As usual, I will illustrate our talk with a slideshow of images, but there's no need for you to look at them if you don't want to. If you prefer, you can just close your eyes, relax, and let my voice guide you. So, welcome to the history of Mary Poppins. Mary was the creation of the writer PL Travers, who was born Helen Lyndon Gough in Australia in 1899. She began her working life as an actress, moving to England in 1924 and adopting the stage name Pamela Travers. She didn't become PL Travers until 1933, when she wrote her first book for children, and it was the publication of that book in 1934 that introduced readers to the mysterious and magical character of Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins first appears when the east wind blows her straight into the Banks family house at 17 Cherry Tree Lane. Mr. and Mrs. Banks are a genteel but rather impecunious couple whose home is in disarray because their family nanny has just resigned from her post and left the house without warning. Mary Poppins, a formidable woman who arrives suddenly out of nowhere, refuses to give Mrs. Banks any references because they are unfashionable. But nevertheless, she's immediately hired by the desperate Bankses and quickly takes charge of their 4 children, Jane and Michael, who are about 5 and 6 years old, and the twins, John and Barbara, who are still babies. When Jane Banks sees Mary Poppins for the very first time, she's reminded of a wooden Dutch doll because of the nanny's shiny black hair. Her appearance is brought to life through the fine illustrations of Mary Shepherd, whom PL Travers collaborated with on all of her subsequent Poppins books, and who was the daughter of E.H. Shepherd, the illustrator of Winnie the Pooh. Mary Shepherd's pictures bring to life the charming world of 17 Cherry Tree Lane, and she does a wonderful job of depicting the nanny, as she's described in the opening chapter of the book. Thin, with large feet and hands, and small, rather peering blue eyes. Those eyes are capable, on occasions, of giving very fierce looks, and the reader quickly learns, along with Jane and Michael Banks, that Mary Poppins is not a woman to be crossed. Nevertheless, over the course of the book, she takes them on a series of amazing adventures. They visit her cousin, Mr. Wig, and end up taking tea on the ceiling. They use a magical compass to go on a round-the-world trip. They celebrate Mary Poppins' birthday with talking animals at the zoo. And they go on a Christmas shopping expedition with a glittering star. Jane and Michael adore these magical outings, but once they are back home in the nursery, Mary Poppins always denies that their adventures have ever happened. If the children dare to mention them, she immediately scolds or silences them in a very cross way. It seems that, in spite of her own wondrous powers, Mary Poppins doesn't think that magic is quite respectable, and she's so keen to cover up any evidence of it that she will happily lie to the children and pretend that what they have experienced has never taken place. This tendency to lie makes it clear that Mary Poppins is not quite so practically perfect as she likes to appear. She's actually an interesting combination of light and dark elements. which perhaps explains why she remains such a compelling fictional character to this day. She's a brilliant nanny in terms of her competence and capability. She keeps order in the nursery, rescues the children when they're in danger, and can be very kind at times. However, she's also rather vain and self-absorbed. She's frequently rude and has no qualms about insulting or jeering at the children. And she's disturbingly mercurial in her temper. Her touchiness is acute. The Banks children never know how or when they might offend her, or how angrily she might react, and this sometimes makes her quite a scary figure. Certainly, to a contemporary adult reader, who might perhaps know a little bit about child psychology, her lack of consistency and her willingness to lie can be problematic. However, it's probably worth remembering that, at the time, during the 1930s and 40s, Mary Poppins' approach to childcare probably wasn't considered to be that much of an issue. Her young readers were definitely willing to overlook the more disagreeable aspects of the nanny's character in order to enjoy her wonderful magic. Mary Poppins was such a success that PL Travers would go on to write a further 7 books about her, and the author herself was clearly very fond of her own creation. This might have been because the character of Mary Poppins was at least partially inspired by PL Travers' own aunt, Helen Moorhead. As a child, Travers had experienced quite a traumatic upbringing. Her father, who was originally a bank manager, was an alcoholic who lost his job and plunged his family into poverty. After his death from influenza, his widowed wife tried to commit suicide, and although the attempt failed, she was clearly struggling to look after herself and her family. It was at this point that Helen Moorhead, or Aunt Ellie as she became known, came to look after her sister and nieces. She was apparently quite a stern, formidable woman who could be a strict disciplinarian, and, like Mary Poppins, she brought order and efficiency to a family that had been in emotional and financial turmoil. She also, apparently, owned a parrot-headed umbrella. How much of Helen Moorhead is in the character of Mary Poppins isn't exactly known, because PL Travers remained pretty secretive about her family background throughout her life. However, as well as being partly based on her aunt, it's also quite clear that Travers drew upon another very formidable figure to create her magical nanny, the archetype of the witch. In terms of fairy tale archetypes, the witch is a figure who traditionally lives outside the norms of society and is an independent force of nature. She's a powerfully magical, but often rather scary figure, and back in the 1930s era of children's literature, she was still usually cast as the villain of the story. P.L. Travers' genius lay in her rather anarchic decision to take the wild witchy archetype and turn her into a domestic nanny. Mary Poppins' magic is potent and beguiling, and, like the witch, she has a rather magnificent independence from the everyday world. However, she also embodies the dark side of the witch, who exercises her power in a sometimes tyrannical or frightening way. Mary Poppins' dominance and control of the Banks children is the price they pay in return for their entrance into her spellbinding world of mystery and adventure. The first person to play Mary Poppins on screen was the American actor Mary Wickes in a Studio One TV adaptation by CBS in 1949. Sadly, I've never seen this production. It was given a limited release on DVD in 2008, but copies of it are hard to find and quite expensive. It's a shame this production isn't more widely known, because anyone who's familiar with Hollywood films from the 1940s and 50s would probably recognise Mary Wickes as a brilliant character actor. She crops up in several classic films, such as Now Voyager, White Christmas, and The Man Who Came to Dinner. and I would love to see her interpretation of Mary Poppins. In still photographs from the production, she certainly looks the part. In fact, her embodiment of Mary Shepherd's original illustrations is almost uncanny, and she certainly looks capable of possessing witchy, magical powers. However, one person who thought Mary Poppins shouldn't be witchy at all was Walt Disney. He was alerted to the film potential of the nanny by his daughters, who loved the Poppins books, and he became eager to purchase the film rights. Disney first approached PL Travers about those rights in the 1940s, but although he was keen, she wasn't, not least because she feared that Disney would take control of her beloved character and sweeten Mary Poppins for a film audience. It took Walt Disney nearly 20 years to persuade her to sell the rights to him, and in the end, she did so only because, by the early 1960s, the Poppins books were no longer selling as well as they once had, and the author was strapped for cash. In 1961, Travers finally agreed to sell, for a $100,000 advance, a guaranteed 5% of the film's profits, and final approval of the film script. In order to supervise that script, Travers flew to California to meet with Disney and his creative team, including the Sherman brothers, who would write the now famous songs for the film. Several of their meetings were recorded, and the audio footage bears testimony to the many arguments that occurred between the studio and the author. In 2013, those audio-taped wrangles were used as the basis for a film called Saving Mr. Banks, which purports to tell the story of how Walt Disney overcame PL Travers' concerns about the Disneyfication of Mary Poppins. The film glosses over much of the truth. It depicts Disney as a charming, laid-back gentleman, whereas in fact he was known to be rather a bully, and his relationship with PL Travers was highly acrimonious. The film also implies that Travers had no family of her own, whereas in reality she had an adopted son with whom she had a rather difficult relationship, not least because, like Mary Poppins, she didn't seem to believe in telling children the truth. Nevertheless, for all its inaccuracies, Saving Mr. Banks provides an interesting and entertaining perspective on the Poppins legend, and it contains a standout performance from Emma Thompson as PL Travers. Once Disney had the rights to the book, he swung into action. Although he had promised that PL Travers would have script approval, he had deliberately not included any film editing rights in her contract, which meant she had no control over what ultimately appeared on screen. Consequently, Disney was able to refashion Mary Poppins as he chose, and what he chose was to make her a lot less scary, a lot more polite, and much, much prettier. As well as being a plain sort of person with big hands and feet, the original Mary Poppins from the books also has a Cockney accent, and she spends a lot of time sniffing and wiping her nose on a large spotted handkerchief. However, that wouldn't do for Disney, so both the sniffing and the Cockney were immediately removed, and the young Julie Andrews was cast as the nanny. With her beautiful singing voice, appealing face, cut glass accent, and ladylike manners, Julie Andrews' performance was about as far away from the original book version of Mary Poppins as Disney could get away with. In spite of this, the film was a huge success, and it continues to be adored by every new generation of children that watch it. Julie Andrews' interpretation of Mary Poppins is a triumph. She's still brisk, still incredibly efficient, and still occasionally rather stern. But she has none of the dark anger or snappy rudeness of the original, and, rather than being scarily unpredictable, her temper is a model of consistency. Under the Disney spell, Mary Poppins becomes, in fact, far more like the sort of nanny that most parents would want in charge of their children. Calm, polite, discreet, and not at all witchy. Although, of course, she does still possess all those wonderful magical powers. Interestingly, many of Mary Poppins' less attractive qualities are transferred in the film to Jane and Michael's father. In the books, Mr. Banks is an eccentric but loving parent, but in the film, he becomes a much crosser and more distant father, who is more interested in discipline and order than he is in his children's welfare. It's possible that Walt Disney decided to change the character because of his relationship with his own father, which was rather troubled. But equally, the alteration could have been made simply to provide the film with a cohesive plot. In the original book, each chapter is a separate, almost independent story. But in the film, Mr. Banks' transformation into a loving and kind father creates a developing storyline that is more satisfying in a screen adaptation. PL Travers hated the changes that were made to her book, and she also couldn't stand the animation or the Sherman Brothers songs. She never forgave Disney and refused to sell him the rights to any further Mary Poppins books, although much later in life she did decide to sell the stage rights to the musical theatre producer Cameron Mackintosh. However, even then, she insisted that the theatre script writer should be British, and she even went as far as having a clause inserted into her will, stipulating that all future stage productions should not include any input from the Disney film team. In spite of this, for many people, Julie Andrews is the definitive Mary Poppins, and I think even fans of the books can still cherish the Disney film. The songs that PL Travers disliked so much are now iconic. The animated penguins that she detested are now family favourites. And the whole film has a bright glow to it that warms the heart of the viewer. Most importantly of all, the film keeps Mary Poppins at the centre of the action, weaving her wonderful magic and combining everyday domesticity with fantastical enchantments. Given how much PL Travers disliked the film, and the steps she took to avoid any further involvement with Disney, you might think that it would be impossible for the studio ever to create any more Mary Poppins films. However, 50 years after the Disney film was released, the legal trustees of the author's literary estate did decide to collaborate with the studio once again, and in December 2018, Mary Poppins Returns opened in cinemas. This new film is loosely based on the second Poppins book, Mary Poppins Comes Back, although it contains several key differences. To begin with, the action is set about 25 years after the first film, when Jane and Michael Banks are all grown up. Michael Banks is a widower with 3 children of his own, Annabelle, John and Georgie, and they provide a new generation of Banks children for Mary Poppins to enchant. Although this time, the adults come in for a bit of enchantment too. In spite of the generation change, the film does echo Mary Poppins Comes Back in a lot of its sequences. In the original book, for example, Michael Banks catches Mary Poppins on the end of his kite, and in the film, Michael's son Georgie does the same thing. Throughout the new sequel, there are many elements like this that pay tribute to the original stories and characters, but reimagine them in a new way. Ironically, before its release, many fans of the original Disney film experienced the same anxieties about the new sequel that PL Travers had originally felt about the first film. Would it be as good? Would it be too sentimental? Would it do justice to the character of Mary Poppins? However, as I'm recording this, Mary Poppins Returns is still on general release at the cinema, and so far, it seems to be doing very well. Some critics have said that they think the film is too derivative and copies the original 1964 film too closely. However, I don't think that these film critics can have actually read the books. If they had, then they would know that PL Travers herself did the very same thing, deliberately mirroring her first book in the later sequels and adding in narrative echoes, such as the story of Bad Wednesday in the second book, which mirrors the story of Bad Tuesday in the first. Personally, I think the new Mary Poppins film is delightful. The story is heartwarming, the animation sequences are spectacular, and the songs are reminiscent of the Sherman Brothers originals, but are also strong enough to stand on their own. However, what I find particularly interesting about the sequel is the development of Mary Poppins as a character. She's played this time by Emily Blunt in a very charismatic performance. And it's fascinating to see how she's taken on the challenge of this iconic character and brought something new to the role. Emily Blunt's interpretation is even less witchy than the Julie Andrews version. She's warmer and more openly loving towards the Banks children. However, this doesn't make the new Mary Poppins a weaker character. If anything, she's stronger and more complex because she's more playful. There's a twinkle in her eye a lot of the time that is rarely seen in the books or in the original Disney film. This playfulness is particularly noticeable in the way Emily Blunt's Mary Poppins talks to the Banks children. When they refer to their magical adventures, she still denies that they ever happened, but she does it in a rather insouciant and whimsical way. Clearly, although she's still prepared to lie about magic for the sake of propriety, this version of Mary Poppins doesn't really expect the children to believe her denials. In fact, she actively encourages her charges to use their imaginations in a way that probably would have horrified the Mary Poppins of the original books. She's still a formidable, no-nonsense figure, and she still has immense mystery and magical power. But the latest version of Mary Poppins is also a character of great charm who seems to actively revel in having fun. The new interpretation of the character is also rather glamorous. Disney has hired the Oscar-winning costume designer Sandy Powell for the sequel, and she has combined the silhouette of Julie Andrews' original costumes with a new palette of much brighter colours and geometric patterns. In doing so, Powell has managed to turn Mary Poppins into a very chic character, and Emily Blunt sashays through the film in a gorgeous collection of royal blue and red tweed coats, jaunty felt hats, and polka-dot scarves and gloves. She also gets to wear the most fantastically colourful costumes in the animated sequences, lighting up the screen in a pink and white candy-striped dress, a jaunty turquoise bathing costume, and a fabulous music hall outfit, complete with ruffled purple petticoats and a bowler hat. This is Mary Poppins as a style icon, and although I don't suppose PL Travers would have approved, I can't help imagining that Mary Poppins herself, who is so vain about her appearance in the original books, might have rather secretly liked the transformation. Just like its 1960s predecessor, the new sequel is a great, feel-good family film, and although the tone of it is very different to the original books, I think it's actually a testament to PL Travers' work that Mary Poppins can be adapted in this way and still retain her original magical spirit. Over the past 80 years, she has changed dramatically, and in doing so, Mary Poppins has acted as an interesting barometer of the changing generations and the evolving preoccupations in popular culture. These days, it seems, we want our witches to be more child-friendly, more fun, and a lot more glamorous. But at her core, Mary Poppins still remains as she always was. Independent, capable, clever, and above all, marvellously magical. In that sense, she's a timeless character, a true classic of children's fiction, and she will no doubt remain so for many, many years to come. I hope you've enjoyed listening to this talk about Mary Poppins. If you have, then please subscribe to my Sounds Curious channel and be sure to join me again soon for another audio adventure. Until then, thank you for your company. Goodbye.